Right. So in last week's class, we talked about four of the features that we should be discussing in terms of democracy. We discussed about constitutionalism, popular sovereignty, then separation of powers and checks and balances. Today we'll move ahead with rule of law. Right? We have four other features to discuss. Now we start off with rule of law. We'll get straight down to business here. Right. So rule of law. The basic idea of rule of law is the law being above everything and everyone, in like the simplest terms. Law being above everything and everyone, that's where it begins. Also, this means the law being equally applied to the ruler and the ruled. Whoever runs the government and whoever is being governed should be equal before the law. All right. Now, if you guys came to that webinar I did on democracy, that Interact project I did a few days ago, you must have seen I spoke about rule of law, right? So this means that now this idea of rule of law goes all the way back to ancient Greece, right? Like even since like Aristotle's days, they talked about the idea of rule of law, although it wasn't necessarily like a particular theory. Still, rule of law was much talked about. So people talked about the whole idea of how the government, whoever is a part of the government, also should be equal before the law. They should not be entitled to any special privileges. They should not be getting any special privileges just because they are a part of the government. Okay. So in simple terms, in a simple example, if you and a minister both get pulled over for driving at a traffic light, at a red light, right? In that case, both of you all should be getting the same punishment, right? Both of you all should get the same punishment. So in that case, the person who runs the government and the person who is being governed is treated equal before the law. When the president walks into the courthouse and when a normal citizen walks into the courthouse, they should be treated same, right? If a member of the parliament has stolen something from a shop, and if a normal person has stolen something from a shop, the punishment should be the same. Everyone should be equal, and the law should be above everything and everyone. No person, could be the president, could be like a police officer, could be a member of the parliament, could be a minister, could be the prime minister. Still, the law should be above all of them. No institute or person should be above the law. Law should be placed above everything and everyone should be equal before the law. So as I told you, this has been talked about quite a lot since ancient Greek days, and it was properly developed as a proper theory by the British legal scholar A.V. Dicey. A.V. Dicey was the one who wrote the book Law of the Constitution in 1865, and he provided like a more of an organized and a structured concept of rule of law. This is A.V. Dicey, right? So it was Dicey who came up with this more organized and structured idea of rule of law. Okay. So this concept of rule of law was initially started in Europe, obviously, like, you know, around the Germany area. Okay. So in the US, of course, the concept of rule of law came with the constitution itself. You guys know that USA established their own constitution. And also in Germany, they came up with this legal principle of the lawful state, right? Lawful state. Lawful state means the state of law. That means, what do you call? Rule of law. It's like, in other words, it is called rule of law. This is known as Rechtsstaat. Rechtsstaat in German, like is a German term here, Rechtsstaat. And then, in USA also, they talked about rule of law, and in their constitution, they included rule of law, not by man. It's a rule by law, not a rule by man. Men can't control other men. Law has to control other men, right? So the principle of rule of law goes like this. They say all officials of the government, including the highest authority, could be the president, could be the prime minister, whoever, should be subjected to the law rather than being placed above the law. Then the power of the government to make an enforced law should be subjected to legal and constitutional limits, right? So whatever the government's power to make a law, to put it into enforcement, it should be subject to constitutional limits. They shouldn't be able to put whatever the law they want. Then the state should refrain from violating the fundamental rights of citizens. They can't just arrest whoever whenever they want, arbitrarily, like, they can't torture anyone. Then the limits of state authority should be clearly stated in the constitution and the judicial decisions, right? Whatever the powers, like whatever the state authority, the limits of the state authority should be clearly mentioned. Then the judiciary should be independent from any interference. This means that they emphasize the importance of independent judiciary, right? That's where the law is given the opportunity to serve justice. Okay. So because it is very important, due to this, the level of importance of rule of law, we see that if the rule of law is protected, we consider that the liberal democracy is violated. In a country where you don't have rule of law, that literally means you don't have liberal democracy in that country. No rule of law, no democracy. So this has become one of the main features. If you want to protect the democratic status of your country, you have to make sure you protect the rule of law of the country, everyone being equal before the law, right? Then this is also based on concepts like liberty, equality, human dignity, tolerance, and all that. Because when people have liberty, if you want to protect people's liberty, people's freedom, you have to make sure that the rule of law is protected. Because the moment the government becomes more powerful, the government gets to bend the law the way they want, government gets to use the law the way they want, they are going to violate people's liberty. Then people are not going to be equal anymore. People in the government have more privileges before the law, while the general public don't. And also it's a problem with the human dignity, right? Humans don't get their human dignity if the people in the government get special privileges, right? Which deals with tolerance as well. So when laws are made to protect all these aspects, then only the goals of democracy is achieved, right? So in other ways that we can see that the rule of law is sort of connected to normative goals. Do you remember in the very beginning we studied normative goals, what is right and what is wrong? So we talk about normative laws also here, normative goals here, because rule of law is about fairness, making sure everyone is equal before the law, making sure everyone gets the same opportunities before the law, everyone gets the same protection before the law, everyone gets the same punishment before the law, right? And that is about fairness, that is about equality, that is about liberty, that is about what's right, that is about what's fair. Because of that, you can see rule of law is connected to normative goals. It's about assuring the fairness and assuring what's right. Okay. That's pretty much it. If you get to write a short note on rule of law, you don't have to write a lot. These all you have to write. Okay, so let's read this bit and find out if I can get someone to read. Let's see. Rifki, can you read? Does your mic work?
Yes, sir.
Right, go ahead.
Rule of law. Rule of law is a core principle of liberal democratic governance, which is strongly attached with constitutionalism and limited governance. The basic idea of rule of law is that the law being applied to all, including the ruler and the ruled. Therefore, the law has to be placed above everything. According to Aristotle, rule of law is important than the dominance of an individual. Therefore, the law of a society should be equally applied to all members, including the ruler and the ruled. That basically means that no person should be given special privileges before the law. The idea of rule has its roots growing all the way to ancient Greece, as Aristotle emphasized the importance of rule of law, criticizing the concept of philosopher king by Plato. In the modern times, the concept of law was discussed by British legal scholar A.V. Dicey in his book Law of the Constitution in 1865, provided a properly organized and structured concept of rule of law. However, the concept of rule of law is derived in the European continent based on the German legal principle of lawful state of law. This is known as Rechtsstaat in German. In the US, the concept of rule of law emerges from the Constitution itself. US is a country which follows constitutionalism. Hence, the Constitution is considered as the supreme law of the country. Therefore, in the American political system, the concept of rule of law is strongly attached with the supreme law, which is the Constitution. Rule of law is also a part of the American common law traditions. It is based on the American political tradition as rule by law, not by man. The principles of rule of law can be pointed as follows. All officials of the government, including the highest authority, should be subjected to the law rather than being placed above the law. The power of the government to make and enforce law should be subjected to legal and constitutional limits that are designed to protect individual liberty. The state should refrain from violating the fundamental rights of citizens through committing acts such as arbitrary arrest, arbitrating, torture. The limit of state authority should be clearly stated by the Constitution and the judicial decisions. The judiciary should be independent from any interference by the executive or legislation. Due to its importance in the country where rule of law is not protected, liberal democracy would not be protected here. Therefore, it is necessary to have regular vigilance over the government to ensure the rule of law is not violating in order to protect the democratic status. According to the above explanation, it can be seen that the values of democracy are strongly attached with the concept of rule of law. Rule of law is based on principles such as liberty, equality, human dignity, and tolerance, etc. When laws are made, it is expected to promote all these aspects in an equal foundation. These are known as normal goals of democracy. Therefore, it can be concluded that the principle of rule of law has normative goals also.
Okay, right. So you have time to make a small short note, and of course, you have time to ask questions if you have any. After that, we are moving into a very interesting part, which is human rights and fundamental rights. Okay. Right. Now we have to look into human rights and fundamental rights. So, first of all, you need to understand what rights are. What is a right? So basically, a right is the entitlements you have, the things that you own, the spaces that you own, right? So in terms of your social life, political life, economic life, what sort of entitlements do you have? What sort of things do you own? Those are your rights. Okay. So currently, whatever the world we are living in, where humans have some sort of a dignity for being a human, right? If you think about the old times we used to live in, where a king could come and a king may come and say that I am taking all the women in this village to whatever the city that I have, right? So the kings used to have this particular city where he built small houses and put women in those houses, right? It's called this Antapura in Sinhala language. So basically, it's practically like a city where there are houses, in which house where the king is just casually walks in just to have sex with one of those women. So a king could simply come and tell that I'm taking this woman to my whatever that place, and the woman has no say, neither her family or her husband or her the person who loves her. Nobody has any say in it. King says I'm taking, that the person is allowed to take. Or a king may come and say I'm going to war, all the men should be joining the army forcefully. So we have come a long way from that time. Or like the time that if your father is a farmer, you have to be a farmer. Your father is a fisherman, you have to be a fisherman. We've passed that stage and come where being a human means something. Whatever you want means something, right? That's because that is basically defined because of these rights people have nowadays, right? Because the rights only, it is known as a fact that we have some control. We have some control over whatever we do. We have some control over our lives. We have some dignity. And that's because of these rights we have. Now, then we have to see like what are these human rights and fundamental rights. Before getting into that, like as I said, you have to have an idea about what rights are. So the first person to talk about rights have been talked about for a really long time. The first person to talk about rights in particularly was John Locke. He talked about natural rights. He said, if you are born, you are given your rights by birth, right? That's how this idea of rights came into existence. And for a long time, the whole idea of rights was there in political science, but only people who studied political science knew rights. Now think about these things like sovereignty or like behavioralism or like political economic approach. These things you didn't know if you didn't study political science, right? Unless you read a lot of books. You tend to, these things, you need to study political science. Your friends who don't do political science, you the elder people who haven't done politics, they don't know these things. So rights also used to be something like that. Only people who studied political science in depth knew about this. But in comparison, we saw that nowadays, rights is not something only political science people know. Everyone knows rights. Everyone have heard of their rights. Everyone knows human rights and fundamental rights. And that's because after 1940s, this concept of rights became quite prominent. How did that happen? It happened because at one point, Hitler was killing all the Jewish people in his countries and whatever the countries he captured. He believed that the Jewish people are like a obstacle for him to build a pure German empire. So in that case, when he was killing the Jewish people, like if you have seen these movies and all that, the concentration camps and how they would just, those people don't have any dignity, right? So those people have been like put into like these areas like are like prisons where you are supposed to just work there. And if something like that, let's say, I saw this scene in one of these movies, these things actually happen, right? So in the morning, they come in a truck, 20 people come in a truck to work in this construction site, all the Jewish prisoners have to work. And in the evening, one day, the evening, the different truck comes because like the normal truck, it has some engine trouble. And the other truck doesn't have enough space to take all these 20 prisoners. It can only have like 16 prisoners. The maximum they can fit in. So they be like, okay, let's kill 4. Let's kill 4, and they just randomly choose 4 people, just kill them and take the other 16, right? So human lives are put down that far. And there are times like, you know, when you wake up in the morning, these army people, like German army people, Nazi people, when they wake up in the morning, like just for target practice, you would just take your sniper and just aim at a random Jewish prisoner and just shoot. So it was like human dignity was put down really, really down, and it was like trampled on. Whereas like the Pope and other political leaders in the country, they were requesting Hitler to stop doing that. Why? Hitler was saying, I am the sovereign authority in my country, and I have made a decision that these people are an obstacle for my great German empire. What is your problem? This is my sovereign country, and you can't get involved in this. So after the World War ended and Hitler was defeated, then only people realized, okay, you know what, just because you are a sovereign leader in your country, you can't be putting people down like that. People entitled something called rights. People have something called the dignity, right? People call something called the dignity. So people deserve something called dignity, and people have to have their rights. So irrespective of wherever you are born in the world, irrespective of your race, your age, your education levels, your gender, your poverty levels, whatever, as long as you are born on this earth as a human, you have rights. It was the United Nations Charter of Rights which said that, right? United Nations put a charter like a declaration and said a set of rights and said every human living anywhere on this earth, they deserve these rights. Okay, so that's how human rights were put. That's what you call human rights. Human rights are universal. Everyone in the world gets universal rights. Everyone in the world gets these human rights universally, right? The set of human rights you have is similar to the human rights someone living in New York or someone living in Moscow, someone living in Ethiopia or China or Greece or New Zealand or Papua New Guinea, anywhere in the world. As long as you are a human, you get the same set of human rights given to you by the UN. Okay. But the problem is, this is given to you by the UN. It doesn't given to you by your state. So if your human rights are violated, you can't really go complain to the state, or you can't go to courts. A lot of people say my human rights are violated, I'm going to courts. That doesn't work that way, because human rights are given to you by the UN, not by your state, right? Which is why fundamental rights are important. So fundamental rights means the rights that is given to you by your constitution. A set of rights are included in your constitution and said the citizens of this country should get these rights. And if those rights are violated, you are allowed to go to courthouses and seek protection. Okay, that's how fundamental rights come into play. Understand? Okay. Right. So in case if your fundamental rights are violated, you can seek the protection of a courthouse. Your country, your government is bound to protect the fundamental rights of you. Human rights, well, not really. You should be protecting the human rights, but it's if they aren't, that is not necessarily like a legal violation. It is a moral violation, right? The UN is going to sort of like question your country and whatever. Fundamental rights, of course, that comes with the judicial system, the legal system. All right. However, if your country is a proper democratic country, you should be protecting both. Fundamental rights, anyway, you have a legal obligation to protect. Human rights also, you should protect. Otherwise, you have to get into hot water with the UN. All right. Okay, so let's read and find this. This is not that difficult. It's basically like common sense and general knowledge, right? Should be able to figure this out. All right, let's get someone to read. Tasha, can you read?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Human rights and fundamental rights. Human rights can be identified as one of the essential features of democracy. Rights and democracy share an inseparable connection. Democracy was developed throughout centuries from the platform created by human struggles to win rights. The political system that does not ensure rights is not recognized as a democratic political system. The basic idea of human rights is the collection of rights every human is entitled to. Therefore, these are moral entitlements that human beings should enjoy in order to enable all human beings to lead a complete life with full development of personality and enjoyment of social justice. Basically, a human is entitled to these rights such as right to life, food, shelter, conscience, and personal dignity, etc., simply due to the fact that they were born as humans, which means humans are born with these moral rights and they inherit rights at birth. According to liberal thinkers, human rights are essential for human beings as oxygen is essential for their biological existence. Human rights are considered as universal rights since they apply to any human anywhere in the universe simply for being born as human despite race, religion, wealth, education, social status, skin color, gender, etc. Therefore, human rights are inseparable from human beings. A violation of human rights is a great injustice on humanity. It should be denoted that human rights are something that are actually discovered rather than invented, which means human rights already existed and suppressed concept in early years. They were not invented nor developed in Europe or anywhere else. They were simply discovered and identified and later legally accepted.
Okay, hold on, Tasha. There's an important point that you need to understand here. Human rights are not something that were invented later, right? It turned out to be human rights was something that always existed all over the years. Then what about the times that slavery existed, where like a country goes and invades another country and just capture those people and bring them back as slaves, like in the Roman times or Greek times, right? Can you imagine just us living like a very casual life here? Like, you know, imagine us having a normal life in a state and we have some other country people coming and invading our country, capturing, and then them just capturing us and putting them in their country as slaves. That was accepted at one point, right? When you go through Roman law books, now when you are if you are going to the Faculty of Law in Colombo University to get your law degree, in first year you have to study Roman law. So typically how the law existed in Rome. We study that because that is one of the first few developed legal systems in the world. So in that you study like if a slave, now imagine I have a slave and if that slave is sort of like hit by a chariot of someone, hit by someone's horse, and the person dies, it is tried in the courthouse as a property damage. Can you imagine a human being who works for me just died, and like I would put the case in the Roman court saying, okay, my property damage, like two of my slaves died, my wall was damaged, my flower pots were damaged, my the wheels of my chariot was damaged. So you put those humans into that. How come that was accepted at one point if human rights always existed? They were suppressed, right? It was something that was suppressed. Rights always existed. It's not that we all of a sudden invented rights and said, okay, you know what, now humans have a value. Humans always had a value. It was just suppressed at one point by the power entities. It was suppressed and human dignity was taken away, right? We didn't invent rights. We just discovered and identified, you know what? We've been having a value to our lives all this time. Why aren't we putting that into effect? That's how it worked, right? So simply people discovered and identified, and later now what's happening is it is legally accepted. I have a right to express myself. I have a right to say whatever I wanted. Humans always had a right to say whatever they wanted, but at that time it was suppressed. If you go against the king, if you go against whatever the religious view that was largely believed at that time, you were burnt alive, right? That's not because that person didn't have a right to speak. It's just that right was suppressed by the state. Now, the Constitution has given a legal acceptance to the right I have. It's not that the Constitution has invented my right to speech. It has simply accepted, and it has identified and accepted, legally accepted that we have rights. They have accepted human lives have a value. Understand? Right. Okay. Right, Asha, continue. History of human rights.
The history of human rights. The legal and the theoretical existence of human rights is a reasonable short history, as it does not go beyond the 17th century. The initial discovery and emphasis of human rights was done by British political philosopher John Locke. Although this was the first theoretical acceptance of human rights, some argue that human rights existed even way before this point. The history of humans runs back to nearly 3 billion years. Some believe that the existence of human rights as old as the human civilization. Although in the initial stages of human civilization, human rights existed as undiscovered element due to the social system featuring slavery, caste suppression, and arbitrary authority of the monarchy. Human rights were hidden during time as they were suppressed by the social and political system. However, with the emergence of free labor, secular education, and the development of literary media and the uprising of printing technology, the idea that human beings are entitled for rights experienced a widespread. This change initially occurred in England, where the society went through a transformation from feudalism to capitalism. As a result, intellectual conversation regularly took place in the society on questions such as should the king have power over lives and property of people, should the power of the king, etc. In this background, people began to develop the idea that humans are entitled to common rights. John Locke identified these as natural rights. According to Locke, these rights are intrinsic to humans. However, the interpretation of John Locke was limited to rights of life, liberty, and property. The founding stone laid by John Locke on human rights were further developed with the contribution of liberal and socialist political thoughts. Most importantly, liberalism, which emphasizes individual freedom, individual autonomy, and sovereignty of the people, provided extremely useful contributions to solidify human rights. Even certain principles of socialism, such as equality and fairness, also supported the development of human rights. The contemporary conception of human rights consists of civil, political, and social rights. It is also important to note that when human rights are included in a constitution, it receives a legal protection. Such rights are identified as fundamental rights. This means that a certain set of rights that have received the recognition from the fundamental law of the country, which allows citizens to seek protection of the law when rights are violated. For example, the Second Republican Constitution of Sri Lanka in 1978 has included the fundamental rights chapter and the third chapter of in the third chapter of the Constitution. The Constitution also has provided jurisdiction to the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka to examine fundamental right petitions. Therefore, it can be seen that the inclusion of rights in the Constitution as fundamental rights makes the effect of rights much more meaningful with the legal protection.
Right, okay. Now we have to understand the difference between human rights and fundamental rights. We'll read that part, keep someone else to read that part. Ishma, are you here in the class? Ishma, are you here in the class? Can you read?
Okay, sir. The difference between human rights and fundamental rights. As discussed above, human rights are a set of universal rights entitled by every human. When they are included in a constitution, it receives a legal recognition from the fundamental law of the country, which makes the fundamental rights. These two concepts are recognized by legal scholars as human rights and fundamental rights are in fact two different concepts which are often mistaken as the same concept by many. As discussed above, human rights are as a hidden feature in the society due to suppression for a really long time until discovered by John Locke and later developed by liberalism and other political theories. The most important landmark of human rights was the United Nations Charter of Human Rights in 1945, which was a global declaration of human rights. This was the first time in history for a specific set of human rights in an organized format to be declared. The main reason behind this introduction was the aftermath of 2 world wars and the mass Jews execution by Hitler, which resulted in a discussion on human dignity and human rights. Since then, the United Nations is acting as a global watchman to protect human rights. Fundamental rights, on the other hand, do not have such a long history as it is associated with constitutions. This concept was introduced after the rise of constitutionalism. However, fundamental rights can be seen much earlier than the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, as the American Constitution introduced fundamental rights in their constitution in 1789. Following this, many countries adopted fundamental rights to their constitution. Human rights are universal and global, which means any person in the world or in the universe will receive the same set of human rights simply for born humans. Fundamental rights, on the other hand, are given through the constitution of each country, which makes them valid only for citizens who live under that constitution, which makes fundamental rights received by citizens, different countries, different from one another. Example, American citizens enjoy the fundamental rights, also carry guns for their protection. Sri Lankan citizens do not enjoy the rights to follow any religion which is not enjoyed by the citizens of Saudi Arabia.
Hold on, there's a typo there. Sri Lankan citizens do enjoy the right to follow any religion, which is not enjoyed by the citizens of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so basically here what it's meant is fundamental rights are different from country to country. Human rights are universal. Wherever you are born as a human, you get the same set of rights, right? Fundamental rights, because that is given to you by the constitution in your country. So it differs from country to country. For example, in Sri Lanka, you can't carry a gun, right? You need to get a permit and all that, lot of work. But in the USA, you can carry a gun. They have gun laws, right? So in most of the states, you can simply go to the shop and buy a gun. So that is their fundamental right. And in Sri Lanka, you have the right to follow any religion you like. Now in Saudi Arabia, you don't get that right. In Saudi Arabia, you are allowed to follow only the majority religion, right? Like that. So fundamental rights are different from country to country. Human rights are the same because it's universal. Okay, right. Continue, Vishwa.
Human rights are not recognized by the legal system or this judiciary or the judiciary of any country. Therefore, these rights are not legally protected. Human rights violations are not monitored by courthouses or written law, but rather monitored by Human Rights Commission, local and UN. On moral principles, steps taken against human rights violation normally include international pressure, diplomatic actions, and economic sanctions, etc. Example, the International Monetary Fund takes the human rights status of a country into consideration before granting a loan. Also, the UN to put economic sanctions and cut off economic ties with countries that do not respect human rights. Fundamental rights, however, are recognized by the fundamental law of the country, which is the Constitution. A certain courthouse in the legal system is in charge of ensuring fundamental rights of protection by the Constitution itself. Therefore, fundamental rights have a legal recognition, and steps against violations are also taken by courthouse itself. Example, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka has the power to examine fundamental rights as provided by Article 126 of the Constitution. Therefore, any step taken to grant relief for a victim of fundamental rights violation comes as a court decision.
Right, okay. So that is the end of human rights and fundamental rights. So this is an area that you may get a question in the exam to write an answer. As you can see, there's a reasonable amount of content. Now, just to give you the basic idea, you don't have to emphasize a lot on the difference between human rights and fundamental rights if you get this question, okay? Now, I have included that part for you to have a better understanding. You need to basically focus on, depending on how they ask the question, if they ask like the importance of human rights and fundamental rights in a democratic country, you don't have to explain a lot about the difference between these two. I've included like an extensive note, so for you to have a better understanding of the two, okay? Other than that, like if you mention this part, the beginning of the note, explaining how important it is, and if you explain the history of human rights a little, with how John Locke came into action, and of course, like the about like John Locke, and then talking about the Hitler's Jew execution and all that, and UN Human Rights Charter, and then briefly explain the difference between HR and FR, then you are sorted for 10 marks. Unless you get this question for 20 marks, which is highly unlikely. If you get that, then you have to elaborate everything. Okay. Right. So as usual, please make a nice short note for human rights and fundamental rights. And if you guys have any questions, you can clarify. I'll give you 11 minutes because this is reasonably a longer area than the other areas, right? Then you have limited government and free and fair elections. They are not that long. We can quickly finish those. Today's class will go till about 9:30 most probably. Yeah, 9:20, 9:30-ish. Let's see. Okay. So moving on with two other features we have left in this lesson. One is limited government. Other one is free and fair elections. Okay. So limited government literally spells it out in the name itself. Like it's like governing the least amount possible. Now, why are we talking about this? Because before democracy, liberalism came into existence, what did we have? We had monarchies. We had the medieval times. Wasn't the best times. And the problem was the government was controlling as much as they could. The government control was way too much. Government controlled every aspect of human life where humans could not enjoy their lives anymore. They weren't really having much of a life during monarchies. So in democracy came into existence, especially when liberal democracy came into existence, people started talking about the necessity of the government controlling the least possible amount of governance. People started talking about that. So with that came the whole idea of like limited government. That means the government doing the least possible amount and letting people live their lives. Okay. So now idea of limited government comes back to the previous points that we talked about anyways. For limited government, there are a couple of main features, right? You have delegated authority. So this idea means that the government does not have sovereign power, right? Government has like a delegated power given to them by the people. Government has a power that is given to them by us. Gotabaya Rajapaksa does not own our country. We just handed him over the country to take care of it for the next 5 years, right? He'll have to get it renewed by us in 2024. Okay. The government is given an authority which is delegated by us. People had the power. People gave it to the government. through an election, right? So they can't be overly powerful. They can't be controlling us way too much. They have to govern in a limited amount because we are the ones who delegated that authority to them. That's one. Secondly, trusteeship and the conditionality, right? So we have given them the power based on a condition, right? We have trusted the government. We have entrusted the government. So we believe that the government will do a good job. We have elected, we have appointed a government, right? The basic idea is like the trust people have. People have laid a trust on the people. So people have laid the trust on the government, and that way that the government has to respect that trust, right? So we have given them a trusteeship. This is given on a trusteeship. It is based on conditions, right? Whatever the power we've given to them, they are given on conditions. So that is conditionality, and it's a trusteeship. Then limited term, right? They do not get to be in power forever. They are given for a limited period of time, ideally 4 to 6 years. A government, a president or a prime minister or a parliament is chosen for a limited time. Once their time runs out, they have to come back and take it. Now, recently, as of the previous government we had, they leased the Hambantota harbor to China for 99 years. And that was a violation of this point because they were in charge of the country for 5 years. And how can they give out a lease for 99 years? Because they've been appointed only for 5 years, right? So this limitation is imposed by the constitution itself. Constitution says you have power for 5 years. After 5 years are over, you need to go out or just win the re-election and come back. Okay. So once the government completes the official term, either they have to just walk out or they have to run in another election and get it renewed. Then coming back to the same points we discussed before, in order to have limited government, you have to have rule of law. That means like the law should be above everything and everyone. The ruler and the government both should be equal before the law. Then you have to have separation of powers. The institutes of the government should be divided into separate institutes, and the powers should be divided. And that way you can assure checks and balances where the government's powers are controlled by the government itself. Okay. So that's pretty much it for limited government. They hardly give you questions to write from limited government. Instead, they normally ask these features as short questions, right? So you'll have to write 2 of these 6. I think in 2019 they asked this question. Okay. Right. So let's read this and find out. Can I get someone to read? Rashid, can you read?
Yes, sir. Limited government. Limited government is a fundamental feature in democratic governance. This basically means that the ruler of the government does not have unlimited power. Rather, they receive a limited power which ensures individual freedom to citizens. Limited governments can be legally interpreted as since their state inevitably has the capacity to misuse power to violate the freedom and rights of citizens. It is necessary to prevent that possibilities. This can be only done by limiting the government. According to the limited government concept, the political power of the government and the members of the government who implement the power are subjected to checks and balances constitutionally. This idea was presented against the theory of absolute power in Europe. This theory was known as absolutism, mainly promoted by Niccolo Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes. Especially Thomas Hobbes presented the idea of the absolute powerful ruler through his theory of social contract. This absolution was criticized by John Locke and Montesquieu, who emphasized the value of liberal democratic principles. Especially Montesquieu suggested that the power of the government should be controlled by the government itself through this theory of separation of powers. Therefore, Montesquieu and John Locke supported the idea of the government of laws, not of men. of man. The initial idea of limited governance was presented by John Locke, who suggested that the ruler receives a limited power through his version of social contract theory. Locke basically had the intention of suggesting an alternative political system to replace the autocratic monarchical system. This was a new interpretation of the social contract theory since it included a legislature, a parliament, which represented sovereignty of the people. In contrast to the social contract theory by Thomas Hobbes, which gives power to the government to control every aspect of human life, the social contract theory by John Locke gives limited power to the government in order to ensure the life, property, and freedom of citizens. Therefore, John Locke suggested a government which has a limited power through his social contract theory. The fundamental conditions of the social contract is that the government has limited power and the government can exceed that given power. If a government exceeds the limits, citizens are capable of replacing the government through an election as people are in charge of the sovereign power. The basic idea of John Locke was later developed with the contribution of many other political thinkers, therefore features in later years.
Hold on.
One
Now, hold on. Now, do you recall social contract theory that we studied? You remember Thomas Hobbes said, like, the ruler didn't sign anything, right? It was the people who signed the social contract, hence, like, all the powers are given to the ruler, and the ruler can just exercise his powers without any restrictions, right? And like in contrast, the social contract theory suggested by John Locke suggested that no, the ruler actually came and sat down and he signed the social contract with the people. So he's bound by certain conditions. He can't just do whatever he wants. So you can see the idea of limited government first came through John Locke's social contract theory, in contrast to Hobbes' social contract theory, which suggested the ruler can do whatever he wanted. So this basic idea, which was developed by John Locke, was later developed better with other contributions of other political thinkers, right? So these were the features which were added later, right? Okay, Rashid, go on.
One, delegated authority. The power of the generation is not owned by the government, which means the authority of the government is derived from the people. Hence, the government only has a delegated power which is given by the people through elections. Two, trusteeship and conditionalities. This means that the powers of the rulers are conditional. The powers are conditional to the trust the people have expressed when they elect the government. The basic idea of the principle is that the trust people have laid to give the political power to rulers should be conditionally respected by the rulers. 3. Limited term. This principle is strongly connected to limited governance. According to the democratic framework, a government is generally appointed for a limited time period, ideally 4 to 6 years. This limitation should be imposed by the Constitution itself. Once the government completes the official term, it is necessary for them to renew their authority in a new evaluation. No government has legal or moral rights to exceed the term limit without renewing the mandate from the people. It is also possible to emphasize the difference between the state and the government by reminding the rulers that they are not the state as their authority requires renewal. 4. Rule of law. Limited governance is strongly connected to the law as it defines the legal limits within which the government exercises its authority under the application of rule of law. The ruler and the ruled are considered equally before the law. 5. Separation of powers. The application of this doctrine divides and separates the power of the government among executives, legislature, and judiciary. In order to ensure limited governance, it is necessary to prevent the concentration of power in a single governmental authority. 6. Checks and balances. This is a system which controls the arbitrary power of the government within the government itself. When checks and balances are in effect, the executive, legislature, and judiciary control each other's power, which is an essential feature to establish limited government. This prevents and suppressive autocracy government.
Right. There's no end here. This prevents suppressive autocracy governments, right? Right now, normally I give you guys time to make a short note, but since this is not that much, we'll finish free and fair elections also, and then we can go directly to a one short note break for both, and then we can take like half an hour and finish the Sri Lankan part also. You guys know, ideally, if I'm teaching the juniors, I would stop at free and fair elections and I would leave the democratic part of Sri Lanka to next week. But you guys are closing in with the exam, so it's better if you guys can stick around and get that part also done. Right. Anyways, now we need to look at free and fair elections. Why free and fair elections is important? Before free and fair elections, think what is an election? Election is where you choose a government. Government means who is controlling us. And you guys know in ancient Greece, we didn't have governments to control us. People govern themselves. We govern ourselves during the Greek city-states time. Now only that we have the system, because unlike Greek days, we can't we all can't get to one place and we can't be making laws, which is why that we are following the system where we appoint people and say, okay, why don't you go and make laws for us? Why don't you go and make laws for us? All 23 million people of Sri Lanka can't go and sit and make laws, which is why we have elected 225 people in the election. We have chosen a president saying, okay, you make the laws. Okay, so you can see election is a process that we put representative democracy into action. If we don't have elections, whoever that is controlling us, we won't get a say to control them. We won't have a say in appointing whoever is that controlling us. Okay, so because of that, we need to make sure that this election process where we get to choose our governments, that we get to put representative democracy into action, is happening properly, right? Now, the mere existence of the election is not enough. It's not sufficient enough. You may have an election system, but what's the point that if the elections are not free and fair? Now see that, okay, there is an election, I go and vote for someone, but let's say that then at the transport part, like, when the ballot boxes, when they are being transported, someone just breaks in and they change the ballot boxes and now they choose someone else, which means the election process is rigged. The election process is like corrupted. That means that people won't get to appoint the leader they want. Someone else will come by rigging the election. That means that we won't get that election properly, and that means that we won't get to choose the proper government. That means it's a failure of representative democracy, right? So normally we see in African, Asian, South and Central American regions who learn democracy from Europeans, right? So these regions often fail to keep like free and fair elections most of the times. Okay, now countries like Sri Lanka, at least we are an exception. In other countries, this is like very bad. Now, these are the quality standards. This is where an election should be held properly. First of all, there should not be any violence related to elections. Secondly, the voters should not be intimidated, or candidates should not be intimidated for that matter. Then there should not be any corruption. There should not be any misuse of public resources. This is something that is heavily violated in Sri Lanka. Government ministers, they use the government vehicles to run their campaigns, right? Then there shouldn't be any malpractices at voting. There shouldn't be any malpractices at vote counting stations. And there should be any malpractices in releasing results. Okay. We hear some of those situations where, okay, the vote happens peacefully, vote counting also happens peacefully, but when they are releasing results, some people go and rig the final results. There were instances like that in Sri Lankan practical politics, so that's bad. So what happens when these kind of things are there? People lose faith and confidence in the political system. The people feel like, okay, it's pointless voting because they are going to, anyway, they will appoint whoever they want. So people lose faith in the democratic system, and the political system falls when something like that happens. So what should be the main features of a proper political system? What should be the features of a proper election, a free and fair election? First of all, people's sovereignty, popular sovereignty, as Rousseau said. That means we should be able to choose our government. whoever the majority requests should win the election. That's number one. Okay. Now, in countries like Zimbabwe, when you have an election, like 90% of the people vote for Robert Mugabe. 98% of the people vote for Robert Mugabe. But it turns out to be like he has just rigged the entire election. And when it happens in like Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi's party get like 90% of the elections, and they'll be like, the military government's like, okay, we don't take this election serious. You are now out of power, right? That shouldn't work. Whoever the country chooses should get the president's position. Then the right to choose. People should have the right to choose from whoever the candidate they want. Like they shouldn't be like, if you don't vote for this person, you get like revenged. Now, there was a real situation like that in Caledonia. Like in Caledonia, in one of those slum areas, the shanty areas, there was this thug called Prince. His name was Prince, okay? So he ran for the divisional council, Pradeshi Sabha. And he lost the election. Turned out to be no one voted for him. So after losing the election, he ordered everyone. This happened in like around, I think so happened in around like 1999 perhaps. I got to know this later, around like 2004. So he asked all the household person, like the head of each house, every father in every house, to walk out and kneel down, like in those shanty houses, right? And he has just taken his belt and he has just hit everyone like 3 times with the belt as punishment for not voting for him in every house. He didn't have any chance to find out who voted for him or who won. It turned out to be that he didn't have enough vote to win. So he punished people. So that means the right to choose is violated there. That is not a free and fair election anymore. Then political accountability. There has to be accountability, that people should see how the election works. There has to be transparency, right? People should be, when people win the election, they should be accountable to people. Okay. Then the consent and legitimacy. That means that people should make a very consensual decision when you are voting. Unlike when Prince says that, okay, next time if you don't vote, like, you'll get to be hammered with the belt. Like everyone goes and votes. So that's no consent, right? That is like a forced vote. And then that violates the legitimacy of the election as a whole. Then, of course, the accountability to people. Now, that means that people also should be accountable. Like they should turn out to vote, and the government should allow people to make a sound decision. So these are the main features that you should see in an election. Okay. Right. Then accountability to people is separately explained as a separate point, right? So we shall see that part as well in a bit. When we say accountability, the public officers and the authorities in a political system should be answerable to people, right? So the accountability can be checked in 2 ways. One is the government being answerable to people. Other one is people expecting the accountable behavior from the government, right? From one side, the government should be answerable. Like if the government should be telling people, okay, you know what? This is the number of money we spent and we haven't stolen anything. Here are the accounts. Go through this. And they should be answerable. They should be like, okay, this is how we are planning to handle COVID. This is the real death counts. This is the real numbers. We are answerable to you. On the other hand, people also should expect accountable behavior from the government. Now, what happens in Sri Lanka is like people don't really care about this. So much so, like these hardcore supporters, them being like, when someone says, okay, this particular leader stole from the treasury, they'll be like, okay, no, who cares? Like, he won the war, whatever. He's such a great leader. What's the problem? Even if he steals half of the country, he finished the war and he did such a service to the country, right? That is bad. That is wrong. That means people aren't expecting accountable behavior. For the government to be accountable to people, first of all, people should expect the government to behave in an accountable way. If people aren't really expecting that, you can't really hope the government would act accountable if people are not necessarily expecting that, right? And also we can see that we use several mechanisms to make sure that the accountability is protected. Number one is that at elections, people are given the opportunity to evaluate and judge the performance of the government, right? So if you re-elect a government, that means they've done well, right? If they vote someone else, that means the government has sort of failed. Then you can have surveys from time to time to see what people are like, sort of like what people think, or else you can try something like having building like establishing disciplinary rules, ethical rules, regulations, right? Codifications and those stuff like making new laws, new rules and all that. Okay. Right. Anyways, you guys should be able to figure this out. We'll read this. Free and fair elections, and then we are done with all the features. Let's see whether we have enough time after that to cover the Sri Lankan part as well. Okay. Right. We'll get someone to read this part. Nashita, can you read?
Okay, sir. Free and fair elections. Free and fair elections are a key mechanism that emphasizes the democratic natures of a liberal democratic country. The people are considered as the origin of political power in a democratic political system. As emphasized in representative democracy, the people get to choose their government and hand over the governmental power. This is done through the election process. The mere existence of elections is not sufficient enough for a successful democratic system. In political science, the emphasis on the free and fair dimension of elections is a certain development which makes the democratic necessity of elections much more meaningful. In the modern day, undeveloped countries and decolonized countries in Africa, Asian, South and Central American region often fail to ensure the free and fair dimension of their elections. The reasons which violate the quality standards of an election are as follows. Violence related to the election, intimidation of voters and candidates, corruption above and misuse of public resources, malpractices at voting, malpractice at vote counting, malpractices at releasing results. The above negative features damage the quality of elections, which eventually disfigures the genuine public will. This results in a distortion of the democratic process and undermining the legitimacy of elections. People eventually lose faith and confidence in such a political system. This disappointment further decreases the public participation in politics, which heavily damages the democratic status of the country. Therefore, contemporary political science focuses on the entire election process rather than merely having elections. Therefore, citizens do not only have a right to vote, rather they have a right to a full, free and fair election. Free and fair elections in a democratic system are based on several concepts of political science. One, for popular sovereignty. The concept of popular sovereignty basically means that the public of the country are in charge of sovereignty power. Therefore, elections are the most important mechanism for the sovereign public to express their political will. Therefore, it is necessary to protect the rights of citizens to exercise their sovereignty. To the right of choose. The essence of representative democracy is the right people are entitled to choose their government. This includes having a choice among political parties and candidates without fear and any other external constraint. This can only be assured through having free and fair elections. 3. Popular accountability. This election is basically the most decisive moment where people exercise their right to hold their rulers to be accountable. Therefore, it can be considered as the crucial process of democratic accountability which should not be disrupted. 4. Consent and legitimacy. Democratic governance is based on the principle of popular consent, which means the willingness of the people to be governed by the rulers they have voluntarily elected. These also create a legal and moral rights. In other words, a legitimacy to governmental rule. Therefore, people consider election to be a sacred political feature. Free and fair elections are the best mechanism to ensure this legitimacy. Losing the legitimacy results in a government losing its legal as well as moral right to rule. 5. Accountability to the people. This principle means that the rulers being accountable to the people whom they receive power from. The election is the ideal opportunity to allow people to make decisions on the accountability of the relevant government. In other words, rulers are pressed to be accountable to the public as a result of elections. Therefore, it can be seen that in order to assure accountability to people, it is necessary to have free and fair elections. The election process grants an opportunity to the public to evaluate their rulers on their accountability and even to replace the rulers who haven't respected the accountability. This further emphasizes the fact that people are the source of authority. Therefore, the persons who hold public offices and authorities in a political system are answerable to the people. This is identified as accountability, which is an unavoidable democratic duty. In political science, government accountability is explained in two dimensions. One, the government is answerable to people. Two, people expect accountable behavior from the government. Contemporary democratic countries follow several mechanisms to assure government accountability to people. One, at elections, citizens are given the opportunity to evaluate and judge the performance of the government. Two, the having surveys to examine public opinion. Three, establishment of disciplinary and ethical rules, codifications to regulations in order to assure the accountable behavior of public officials. The main purpose of the above mechanism is to prevent democratically inappropriate or anti-people behavior. Intentional law, unintentional, of people who handle authorities in the government. Modern day democratic countries have gone further to assure the legal, proper, and ethical behavior of the government and officials by taking even more effective and specific measures such as 1. Adopting laws to assure the right of information of people. 2. Establishments of authorities of auditing and policy analysis. These auditing institutions are not limited to financial auditions, and they even include environmental auditing and gender balance auditing, etc.
Right. Okay. So then we have this, I prepared a list of a longer list so that you guys won't miss out on key aspects of democracy, right? So most of these were there in the notes that we discussed thus far, right? Other than that, I've included an extra note of other features of democracy that are not mentioned there, right? So just go through that when you're at home, like freedom of media, uninfluenced pressure groups, existence of a proper civil society, and etc. Okay, right. So then this is the part we have. Okay, hold on one second.